There is no telling this story. It must be told. No doubt many of us gathered here this evening are familiar with the opening sentence of the notanda in M. nourbeSe Phillips' book-length poem, Zong. The sentence is remarkable on several accounts. First, as the moment we finally come up for air. For although readers in possession of a book, in the uncertain attempt to read Zong, we've had to wade increasingly out of our element. From the soft opening stammer of water, quote, w, 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 ah, wa, w, ah, wa, t, where even the oldest among us are become children again, sounding it out, to the palimpsestic visual cacophony of Zong's final page, where it is nearly impossible to make out any words at all. The reliability of our usual protocols for reading increasingly forsake us. We cannot pass our eyes over this fragmented and blown apart text from right to left, up to down, and hope to access its meaning. We are, if you allow an analogy befitting of a subaquatic conversation, air breathers underwater. Once, in a moment of pedagogical negligence or even cruelty, I sprang Zong on an undergraduate class without warning or preparation. We were discussing close reading and the importance of attending to a text's form as well as its content. Zong, you can imagine, makes this point rather dramatically. But when I, poker-faced, asked the class to read the poem aloud, without a single hint of acknowledgement of the difficulty of my request, one student simply and rightly replied, "How?" I'm not sure the student intended it this way, but their how seemed to me then, and remains to this day, one of the most beautiful and earnest readings of Zong I've ever heard. How? A question, if Olade Equiano's interesting narrative is any indication, I imagine the Africans in the middle must have asked often under the circumstances. How does the ship go or stop? He asked. And in so many words also, how will I ever get home? Or how will I survive this world I've gotten into, which, from the looks of it, seems as if it is going to kill me? What is there to say about the sober magic of a punctuationless poem that not only conjures the questions that must have been on the lips of middle-passing Africans, but manifests them on our own lips, though we've read these questions nowhere? When we bring our individual hows to Zong, and if you hear more than the interrogative adverb here, you're not wrong, we take our leave from the certainty of terra firma and are at sea, in some small measure of the way that the Africans aboard the Zong were also at sea. By the time we read the complete sentence, there is no telling this story. It must be told. It is a kind of mercy, a coming up for air. So relieved are we in the reading of this sentence that we are really quite happy to contend with its remarkable paradox. There is no telling this story, no adequate telling of how some 150 Africans aboard a British slave ship called the Zong were laid to unrest in the Atlantic, no sufficient elaboration of this massacre by drowning that began on November 29, 1781, and continued for 10 days, no words to capture the absurd banality of the nothing but prudence which determined that the money insuring these talking commodities was worth more than their lives. No right words to tell how this mass murder was, in fact, merely and only the destruction of property, criminal only as insurance fraud, if criminal at all. And yet, Philip tells us This untellable story must nevertheless be told. But how does one fulfill an obligation to an impossibility? Sound out a silence, represent an absence. Yet the paradox is rather more remarkable even than this, for what could be and even sounds like two sentences, there is no telling this story, period. It must be told, period, is in fact one sentence. There is no telling this story, semicolon. It must be told, period. If semicolons are still used to connect two independent clauses that are closely related in thought, then this paradoxical sentence tries to pass off two opposing thoughts as relatives, which is to say that the sentence refuses any confession that it is indeed a paradox. With a precisely placed semicolon, this paradox dons its own kind of poker face. And Philip, facing it down, determines that this story that cannot but must be told precisely by not telling. The poem Zong, in other words, is a not telling. But of course, those of us who have put our hands to the difficult labor of bearing witness to the unspeakable, especially as it pertains to the phenomena of black life and death in an anti-black world, are intimately familiar with this paradox and know it in a single sentence kind of way. Incredible, really, how we've appropriated some of the master's linguistic tools, how over the centuries we've managed to hold ourselves together with semicolons and hyphens in a world revolving around our rending. I return again and again to nourbeSe's semicolon sentence as a cherished distillation of the expressive bind we're all in. What the poet June Jordan memorably described in honor of Phyllis Wheatley as the difficult miracle of black poetry. Indeed, this business of inexpressibility has long been with us, since Equiano's description of the hold of the slave ship as a, quote, scene of horror almost inconceivable. So much of what we have to say is too much. But this occasion to revisit Philip's jewel of a sentence put me in mind of another well-known instance of ineffability from the black intellectual tradition. It's that moment early in the souls of black folk when W.E.B. Du Bois describes being harangued by questions from well-intentioned and even sympathetic white folks. Quote, "They approach me in a half-hesitant sort of way, eye me curiously or compassionately, and then, instead of saying directly, 'How does it feel to be a problem?' they say, 'I know an excellent colored man in my town,' or 'I fought at Mechanicsville,' or 'Do not these southern outrages make your blood boil?' At these I smile, or am interested, or reduce the boiling to a simmer, as the occasion may require. To the real question, how does it feel to be a problem, I answer seldom a word." What I wish anachronistically for Du Bois, and contemporarily for readers of Du Bois, is the good news of Zong, our witness that it is actually possible to answer seldom a word, that answering seldom a word, or not telling a story that cannot be told but must, is not the same thing as having nothing to say, or sound out, or shout, or howl, or moan, or mumble, that the end of words is not the end of witnessing. Standing before you now, I'm in something of my own expressive bind. I've been charged with making an introduction. But you see, and to riff on a sentence I like, there is no introducing nourbeSe Philip, who's made poetry less from the discovery of the right words than perhaps the brave concession that the right words do not exist. This poet who sings the stammer, this translator of silence, who's been quietly, or not so quietly, staging a revolution in the English language. There is no introducing this poet, novelist, essayist, playwright, and author of too many books to enumerate, this winner of numerous honors and awards, including something called a Windham-Campbell Prize. Nevertheless, she must be introduced. But this is an expressive bind I don't mind, because disaster and catastrophe have never had a monopoly on the ineffable. The true, the good, and the beautiful are just as wont to leave us at a want for words. There is no introducing nourbeSe Philip. So now that I haven't, please join me in extending to her our warmest welcome and thanking her for trying her tongue.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So you see this bowl here, and there are questions actually, a bowl of water, and Jonathan has written his questions. This part was a surprise to me because I had suggested to him that we do something that I did some years ago at a conference. After a reading of Zong, I had a bowl of water on the stage. There was supposed to be a Q&A, and I asked the audience, as you will be asked or invited if you want to, write your questions on a piece of paper, and we will submerge them in there and pull them randomly. Jonathan took me by surprise and put his questions in his own bowl of water. So here we are. We have, he doesn't know and I don't know what questions that will come and in what order. So thank you. And we have some shells there. I went to your beautiful beach today, Lighthouse Point. I love collecting shells, and once I pick up one, I can't stop. So I now have a collection from New Haven, and they're there as well. And it being the Atlantic, it meant something to go see it, yeah. So.
Shall we pick a question?
Shall we pick a question?
Okay. Will you do us the honor of picking the first question? They're in my voice, so if you read them.
So I'll read them and answer them.
Yes?
Or do you want? We can.
Oh, yes.
Just having fun, you know, these academic contexts can be so, yeah. In our correspondence, in preparation for this conversation, you mentioned that you recently remarked to a friend that poetry is your faith. For curious and interested parties, how does one go about signing up for this faith? What's the process of conversion or discipleship? You're clearly a church man. Could you offer us a bit of your of your conversion narrative, so to speak? What, in your estimation, are this faith's most significant rites? It's a wonderful question. And somewhat difficult in terms of the emotions it'll probably call up. So I was raised Anglican by parents who never went to church, which is odd in black families, right? But I come from the Caribbean. I never saw my parents go to church. But the ritual, the pattern, the tradition was children went to church, got confirmed, made their first communion, and so on. So I partook in that, as did my brothers and sisters. I've always, however, been really interested in spiritual ideas. And so it wasn't a matter of leaving the church or anything like that. For instance, when I first went to Canada to do my master's, I'd done a first degree at the University of the West Indies in Jamaica. I came upon a book by a man called, or about a man, I don't remember, I don't think it was a memoir, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. How many people know of Dietrich? And Dietrich was a German man who took a stance against the Nazis, was actually involved in, he was a minister, I believe, and was actually involved in a plot to get rid of Hitler and was actually killed for that. There's a film, I know I saw one film about him. I don't know, for some reason, this his conviction, his commitment to something larger than himself, which is where the link with poetry will probably come, really deeply affected me. In later years, Simone Weil is one of the people, the philosopher, whom I have a deep attachment to, mainly because she lived contradictions, and my life is one of contradictions. So both of those people, and she grappled and grapples. I say grapples because I still listen to her and read her work. The Need for Roots is a work I strongly recommend. I think Pierre Trudeau, this is Justin's father, actually read it or suggested when he became prime minister that people read it. And this is one of the things she says in it, very important point, linking to what Jonathan said about the history of how we got how these European languages were imposed on us. She says that the European, after uprooting themselves from their own cultures in Europe, their own earth-based cultures, went around the world uprooting the rest of the world. And it's a statement, I read that maybe 60 years ago, maybe less than that. I'm very old. And it has always stayed with me. So one of her contradictions was she was Jewish, but she became very deeply involved in Catholicism, in Christianity. But she refused to get baptized because she believed that Catholicism omitted too many of the world's wisdoms. So those kinds of contradictions really interested me and still interest me. Let me go back to the question. So how does one sign up for the faith? I don't know if I discovered poetry or poetry discovered me. And some of you may have heard me say yesterday, the two sources of my love of language, the Anglican prayer book, the Book of Common Prayer, the old edition, which has so much poetry in it. Lord, let us now this thy servant depart in peace, because my eyes have seen thy salvation, the Nunc Dimittis, all those things. And also the vernacular on the street, the Calypsonians, Look she day, mama, look a boo-boo, they say. Their mother tell them, shut up your mouth, that is your daddy. Oh no, my daddy can't be ugly, so. And it goes on, right? But they understood the vitality of language and how to use language. These are Calypsonians now, the people, as a weapon, against the colonizer. So those are the two sources of it. I think the reason why I said it recently, Jonathan, was because in the last year or so, since the events that have been transpiring in Gaza, I have had my non-existent faith shattered and shaken. Again, that contradiction, because. And I should just give a little background, because I come out of politics. I didn't study literature. After high school, I did political science. And I have always been interested in international law. Even in law, I was interested in conflict of laws and so on. And when I left law, I practiced for 7 years. I left law for poetry. And both these disciplines share a lot. The absolute obsession with language. Think about it. A comma, a period, the way a sentence is parsed, yes? But when I left law, the one area I thought I would still want to work in would be international law. And for some reason, even though I consider myself somewhat cynical and hard-headed, I believed in institutions like, the United Nations. I know all the politics behind it, the International Court of Justice and so on. And month after month after month, I've seen my faith in that shattered to a point where, and what I've done to manage that grief has been to write poems. The poems just come, I call them occasional poems. I'm not working on them intensively. And so I heard myself saying to a friend that the only faith I have now is faith in poetry. And I say that, but I also think it's a really powerful statement, because I think what I say in the preface to Zong is that there's a sense in which I believe poetry exists outside of us, which is what faith does as well. There's something larger than us. And I think what I believe in is that this language that was imposed on me, but which I'm struggling to live in and make my own, that through that, these poems that I write sometimes, I probably will read one this evening, The Poets Awoke, where I got up one morning in December, we were in Tobago, and I just thought, what happens when you lose words? How do you? Now, I've lived through, the period of time when writers were imprisoned in the Soviet Union and people, writers like Solzhenitsyn. And as poets, we have to find ways of writing about this as the arena becomes smaller and smaller about what you might be allowed to say and can't say. So my feet hit the ground. I've never done this before. I picked up my cell phone, and this poem just came, The Poets Awoke, and it builds from there as to what do you do when your words flee you, thee, and, but, when you're scrabbling to find them, how do you deal with that? So those are some of the feelings. It's really a way of managing a deep, deep grief for us as human beings. As human beings, yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
I think
I'll sign up.
Yeah.
It sounds like a wonderful faith. All right, I'll pick one now. An unexpected pleasure of this exercise is the peeling of the question. Okay. This is a callback to the...
I get nervous when he said, okay.
This is a callback to the introduction I just delivered. So, how would you have answered my puzzled students how? Or anyone wondering how to read Zong? What are your wildest hopes, or perhaps exhortations, for readers of Zong?
When you said that, I thought, wow, that's so powerful. How? How did this happen? How are we living with what's happening around us today in this world with climate change? How? What are we doing? How do we manage that? So I think the students have a way without realizing it, they zone in. A student in Ghana said to me when he looked at Zong many years ago, and he said, I just feel like I'm not getting it. And I said, but that's what it is. You're not supposed to get it. Yes, and I think we're very uncomfortable with that.
Yeah.
Particularly as academics and thinkers and so on, we're supposed to get it. How do we live with the indeterminacy of what's happening around us and not knowing? And that's where poetry, I think, offers us. Because poetry sometimes offers you that place of being in the both and, the neither nor. One of the things I say, because I used to practice law and I love a good argument, and which is why I write essays, right? I love to make argument. But I also don't want to make argument in poetry. And so essays allow me to sort of discharge that tendency to want to make argument. So I feel that if I can make the arguments in the essay form, then I can live in the contradiction. So Discourse on the Logic of Language, that's one of the poems in She Tries Her Tongue. English is my mother tongue, is my father tongue, is a foreign languish. English is a foreign anguish. How does one inhabit these two things? Because the implication of a father tongue is very different from a mother tongue. A mother tongue is what you learn at your mother's breasts, and she actually blows words into your mouth. I remember seeing a French woman in Toronto after I wrote that poem, and she was teaching her little baby how to say that EU sound that's so hard for non-French speakers, ooh, and she's ooh, ooh, to the baby. Then I happened to be in Swaziland not that long after, and a mother was holding her baby. Now, you know that sound they do, the click sound is called. And there she was looking at her baby and making the click sound and teaching the baby the click sound. It was really beautiful to see, across continents, it's the same instinct to pass on language. And so the how, and what I think the second part of the question was, so to come back to finish the how, I think that we who have survived the Ma'afa, as some call it, the Middle Passage, we haven't even named it, really. Do you know it's given this name, the Middle Passage, the Triangular Trade. We haven't really named it. The South Asians call it the Kalapani, or Kalipani, the dark water. There's a poetic truth to that, yes? It must have been so dark crossing the oceans. I think it's, is it Kalipani? Oh, Kalipani. Kalapani, I was right the first time, yeah. The Kalapani. So, how have we survived? Yeah. Sometimes we ask ourselves that ourselves. And I think we have survived. I was saying this recently. I think we have survived because we know that no one can make of us a thing. That although the law said that we were in excess of that. There's a wonderful work called The Law is a White Dog by a wonderful, brilliant scholar called Colin Dayan. How the rituals of law make and unmake people. The law is like magic, which is what I deal with in Zong. It is a form of magic where you can decide somebody doesn't exist. You can lock them up in these maximum security prisons and take away. She goes into this in that particular work. And what do I mean by saying that so my feeling has been, yes, we can celebrate emancipation and those things, but we should always keep in mind that our freedoms, and this applies to other conditions too, were never theirs to take in the first place. Therefore, they cannot return to us what was never theirs. I think when I hear the spirituals, when I hear the songs some of the songs that were played here yesterday, those people knew. They knew that truth, that there's another kind of freedom that's in excess of that legal restriction. Yes? So I think that's very important for us to keep in mind always, that at a deep level, the human psyche understands that. Our particular experience had to deal with this thing in this particular way, and we knew that always. Yes? The spirituals tell me that. Reggae music tells me that. R&B tells me that. And as I'm on music, I'll just finish this point. Aretha Franklin's funeral, if you find it, there's a particular point when the Clark sisters, the gospel singer sisters, are singing. And I heard that sound and I thought to myself, that is the sound that those who brought us over have been trying to extinguish ever since they've got here. It was just something about it. Yeah. It rose and it broke, and I thought, yeah, that's it. So those resources are there, but the systems are very powerful. Let me see if I've got the last part of your question.
The last part, I'll tell you.
The best reading of Zong?
No. What are your wildest hopes for readers of Zong? Hopes or exhortations?
Expectations?
Exhortations.
Exhortations. My wildest hopes or exhortations. I'm pausing because it's a profound question, and I think the best way I would answer that is my hope would be that they come close to being able to listen in some way to the silence. Is the silence and the many silences that inhabit the text and that the text inhabits at the same time. No more than that.
That's a wild hope. That's a wild hope.
It's a wild hope, yeah.
But it's a good hope. Yeah.
Because I think the reason why I'm saying that is because I said this to you. The most important thing happening on the pages are not the words, but the silence. And the silences actually construct the words. And so if we can, which is why I did that experiment yesterday at the reading, having people read from pieces of Zong, just to be able to listen, because listening is more than hearing. We can all hear, but to listen is to really want this thing to land and to hear what I might not want to hear. Yeah, and that's so difficult today. I used to make myself listen to right-wing radio periodically because we do, and it's so much more exaggerated now. We all are in our own channels, and we're not listening to anything that doesn't fit with what we believe. It's an interesting experiment to try it every so often and see what happens. Right-wing radio, podcasting can be very difficult.
I could imagine.
Yeah, so my turn?
Yeah, your turn.
I don't know when this ends, so somebody will have
to. Someone's going to have to keep track of time.
Because I'd love for you to write some questions and put them in here. And if you want to start, does everyone have those?
Yeah, everyone has a scrap of paper and a pen.
Yeah.
So if a question occurs to you,
even now, just scribble it down. And
come on up, drop it in the, like giving offering at church. Just drop it in the little the fish bowl.
Yeah, do.
Go back to your seat and we'll
and
get
and please, if you don't want to do that and just want to stand and ask a question, no problems. In your 2017 book of essays, Blank, you write that I'm still hunting, trying to find the word or words to describe middle passage, site of so much grief and trauma, final home to so many of us. Can you share perhaps a crucial moment, insight of your hunt thus far, and where you imagine or suspect your hunt may be taking you in the years ahead? Well, I don't know how many more years I have, but I'm still hunting, trying to find it. Yeah, well, it links to what I was saying before, that we haven't even named it yet. And as a poet and a writer, as a parent, naming is so important. Yeah. We call it the middle passage.
When you said that, over the course of working on my own work, because I have loved for a long time the name Middle Passage, because it seemed poetic to me. And then there's this haunting moment in Edward Glissant's The Open Boat where he has that question that he imagines middle passing Africans must have asked, where he says, what kind of river has no middle? Is nothing there but straight ahead? And what occurred to me was a lot of these folks who were forcibly marched from the interior to the coast, we're, like in Equiano's case, we're seeing the ocean for the very first time. Absolutely. And so the middle passage is anachronistic for them because there was no knowledge that there was the middle of anything.
Exactly.
And so we grant a knowledge of the middle where perhaps for some there was no knowledge of the middle.
Exactly.
And since then I've wondered, well then what is it? What is the name?
One expression I sometimes use is the great scattering. Because, enslaved people were taken to Arabia as well. The Arab slave trade predated the European slave trade and continued after that slave trade. So we have been scattered. It's an almost, not nondescript, but almost neutral, the great scattering. Because I think it's the naming is so important. And what you say confirms what I thought, because the Middle Passage was given by the Europeans. That was how they described it, because they understood. It was in the middle of the Atlantic and between Africa and the West. But the Ma'afa, which is a Swahili word, and the scholar, her surname is Christiansen, her first name escapes me now. She began using that many years ago. She's now passed away. And I often use it, M-A-A-F-A, and it means in Swahili, great suffering. Yes? So you'll see some writers using that as a way to not so much Africanize it, but to make it ours, to inhabit the experience, as the Kalipani, the dark water, yes?
Yes.
As the South Asians called it, yeah.
Should we turn to some of the audience's question? I want to make sure that we leave
have
a
time
little
for
bit of
that.
time.
Yeah.
This is a great sacrifice, because there's one question that I really want to ask.
Do you know which one?
I don't know which one. I should have marked it, like labeled it. I should have cheated. Nah, but I want to make sure we get some of the audience's
Shall I
questions.
pull?
Yeah. This is practice for voting for those who vote, I guess.
Oh, it's lovely handwriting. There is no record of the names of the murdered Africans, yet each page of the first part of Zong includes a list of names beneath a line. These names were so important in your performance yesterday. Where did they come from? And what does it mean that you place them where they are? And we were just talking about names and naming. Serendipitous, beautiful. It's a beautiful question. So when I was working on Zong at one point, and just give you a brief out very quickly, I was reading a book by James Walvin, an English scholar. And he wrote this book called not Black Ivory. Title's going to escape me. But he said he was writing the book to almost as a pushback against a certain kind of scholarship about slavery that was very invested in numbers. He wanted to bring the humans, the people, back into it. He mentioned the case Gregson versus Gilbert, and I read about it, and I was kind of horrified. I thought I had never known about this. I put it away, went to the law library some years later in Toronto, and found the case and was really shocked to see it was just 2 pages. So fast forward, I'm working on Zong, and I have this feeling that I have to name these people. And I knew the answer when he told me. I actually tracked him down, James Walvin, and called him. And I said to him, do you have the names of the people who were on board? And he sort of gave this little chuckle, and he said, oh, no. He said, you know that they never kept names, and I'm sure many of you have seen it. Negro man, Negro woman, the occasional gloss, meager, as in a child. And I thought, yeah, of course, I knew that, So what I decided to do then was to pull names from, because the trade pulled on all parts of the continent, to pull names from as many places in the continent and to put those under the footnote line, so they're floating below the poem. And so often when people, students in particular, when they're reading, I've seen this happen, they'll just completely forget. Like they don't go down to below the line, they just go to the next page, which sort of brings forward how they've been forgotten. And in all cultures, naming is so important, whether you name your children after the previous generation, grandfathers. In African cultures, I recall reading somewhere that before the child has a name, the child isn't even considered human, so to speak. So naming of them became very important. And I'm looking at, the person said that the names, I'll just add, yes, please, and I'll just add, they became so important to me that I then conceived or felt that I had to ask permission to bring them forward, which is what took me to Ghana and to doing a ceremony with the airway people and asking that the voices of those people, that I be given permission to bring their voices forward. And I should add, if I'm going to express my contradictions, as I have said, on the plane back from Ghana, I had this thought. The thought was, nourbeSe, if you're asking the ancestors of everyone on board the ship for permission, you have to go to Scotland and ask the European ancestors as well. I remember thinking, no. No, don't ask that of me. And anyway, the plane landed in London, and I realized that I had to do that. And it comes from a belief that on that plane, the things that we stress ourselves out about and believe, I think the ancestor is the ancestor, and I couldn't project my feelings, or I don't want to. So I went to Liverpool, I bought a bottle of whiskey and went down to the harbor, fell, but I poured a libation to them and then was able to continue. Yeah, so thank you for that question. That was lovely. And what does it mean that you place them where they are? Because they were footnotes in history. So they literally occupy the footnote place on the page. Yes? But when I perform, sometimes I whisper them, I call them, I sound them. They become really important. Yeah? Another question. Well, this one just went in. Oh, this is beautiful. For me, who would never have heard the story of Zong, the way you wrote it and performed it and created ritual around the story has made it unforgettable to me. I hope this is one answer to your wildest wishes. Thank you. Who wrote this question? I won't ask you if you don't want to. Let's see. Do you know, I want to share with you in terms of language, you know Zong? Okay, so Zong, the original word was Zorg, means care in Dutch and German. And when they were repainting the ship, the R became an N, means Zong. But my understanding is Zong in Mandarin, I think it's Mandarin. I had a Chinese acupuncture at one point, and she told me Zong means ancestor. Go figure. So again, you know, it's interesting how words, that's why poetry is my faith, maybe language, in the sense that even though it betrays us, not poetry, but language. The same word in the same spelling of a series of letters can mean something so different, do you know? Are there specific archival silences that you have found when you have reproduced or transposed, which you have reproduced or transposed as silences in your poetry? Are there specific archival silences? Well, I think the archive is a howling silence. Think about it. Certainly as it relates to us. The archive is silence, and we translate that, all of these wonderful scholars, you're translating those silences through different methodologies, using different theories, you're translating those silences into something that then we can take and help to make our lives possible, to solve the how. But the archive, I think, is synonymous with silence. Yeah, that's how I would approach that. Yeah. A silence that speaks, but doesn't speak our language. Yes, for the most part. I don't know if that makes sense.
Makes sense to me.
Do you want to do one of your questions, maybe?
Yeah, I'm going to pull one
hoping that it's the one.
fishing for the one. And if it isn't, then we could trade off to the...
You're not a betting man.
Yeah. Ooh, falling apart. This ain't the one. I could already tell.
You can pick another
It's
one.
too long. We're gonna put that. We're cheating now. Oh, this is a question. This isn't the one, but it's worth asking, I think. So you've written in relation to Zong and others of your works of a practice that you call a poetics of repair. How does poetry repair? What can poetry repair? Conversely, what can't it repair?
How does poetry repair? The poetics of repair. So I use that phrase with particular reference to Zong and my belief that there's certain kinds of reparations, which is the word, it's a buzzword today, only we can give ourselves. And there's some things that cannot be repaired. I think what has happened to us, to the peoples who were brought over as enslaved people, cannot be repaired in that sense. But what we do is that we find ways of healing those breaks, those ruptures. And maybe I'm splitting hairs if I say healing as opposed to repaired. But what I want to hold is this idea that some of those ruptures were so profound that to think that even, although I understand the need for reparations, but I think we must be very careful as well to understand that there is no amount of money in this world that can ever repair the fact that so many of us don't know where we come from. We don't, you go back 4 generations, 5 in the Caribbean, and there's nothing. The languages we spoke and so on. Yeah. There is, so we have to hold those two things again. But there was also, because we live in these capitalist societies, that's the language of the society, and I understand the claim for reparations. Yeah. But also as a person of spirit, I think we also have to understand that there are reparations that only we can give ourselves and each other. Yeah. And for me, I think Zong has become something of that. When we do the annual readings, for instance, and we read through this, so we read the entire book, it takes us several hours, we end early in the morning, and it's usually quite small, maybe 20, 30 people. I don't think, maybe we've had 40 at one point. And interestingly, over the night, the audience winnows itself, which is a sort of very poignant replication of the slave voyage. Wow. So usually by 3 or 4 in the morning, there are a few of us with a drummer who keeps us awake. What is interesting is that you would think working with such a difficult subject, you would end up feeling quite depressed and down-pressed, as the Rastas say, and so on. It's very different. There's a sense of feeling that, for me personally, I feel almost like washed out. As if you're lying on a beach, so you sort of swam and you're exhausted, but I don't want to use the word positive. It's an exhaustion not of being depressed or oppressed. Yeah. It's an exhaustion of having done a task and you've done it to the best of your ability. Right. And now you can move on. Because that last section of Zong, to those who know it, it's very difficult to read at 3 or 4 in the morning. Because the challenge is, am I reading for meaning? Or am I reading for sound? And you're too tired to make meaning. And again, it's interesting because these things I've learned, you realize that this is what they would have faced when they after they've come through the middle passage. Now you have to make meaning. of, of, of what's going on around you and the language and so on. It's a totally different, level of difficulty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things you said about your point about reparation, I think viewing reparation, one of the unintended consequences of viewing reparation monetarily as something that is given to us is that we abdicate precisely what you're saying, this reparation that we can only do for ourselves.
Yeah.
And so that's a helpful idea, and I think that the durational readings that you do of Zong every year, the annual readings that you do in those groups, are part of that collective sounding out and healing, the reparation that we can do for ourselves.
Yeah.
And I wonder what it would mean if we diverted some of the energy towards, not all of it, because pay up, but some of the energy towards
yes.
the reparation that we can do and can only do for ourselves.
For ourselves, yeah.
Absolutely.
So, that's very, very true. And it links for me to the protocols of care that I developed around the readings. And so yesterday, those who were there may have noticed there were 2 black women halfway down. So I usually go to different people as the Spirit moves me. But I just wanted to acknowledge them. They were sitting there. And the only reason I say that is because I think it doesn't have to be anything splashy. It can be just how we work with each other. Like, what are the protocols of care we bring to each other in our friendships, in our classes, and so on. Do you know? Because to come back to this idea of poetry and faith, I remember when my kids were very young, I loved African violets. And I had these African violets, but I also had these kids, and they need the same kind of attention and care. And poetry writing is about attention, is about care, like listening is about care. So I got rid of my African violets, not the kids. Although maybe I should have. Anyway, and it's very easy not to be careful. Particularly in this fast culture. If it's anything I sort of want to leave us with today, is just this idea of developing our own protocols of care in little ways. Because it's not going to be the big splashy thing that is going to help us. It's going to be like, the people, the enslaved singing in hush harbors, gathering to sing together and doing those things for each other.
Yeah.
What is the modern version of that? The contemporary version of that. Yeah? One more here.
We have 5 more minutes. That might be enough time for one more question.
One more?
Yeah.
You want to try and find your...
Yes.
You found it?
I did.
Okay, so shall I deal with this one, or you want to deal with that one?
I think maybe we'll deal with both of them. We'll
Yes.
get them both on the table, and we'll deal with them
okay.
equally and democratically, but with slight preference for mine.
Okay.
And so this is long, so I'm just going to read the part that I mostly care about. So you talk about the keeping journals during the writing of your certain manuscripts. At least in the new preface of Zong, you talk about keeping a journal during the writing of She Tries Her Tongue. You kept a journal and quote from a journal that you kept during the writing of Zong. There's a passing line in the journal, the working journal you call it, for Zong, where you say, "Always what is going on seems to be about water." What does it mean for water to always be going on in literature? How do you perceive, recognize, or register the going on of water in Zong?
The ongoingness of water. So shall I read this one as well? I have had woven a tapestry and had pieced together a multicolored quilt of silence, my many silences held together by the most invisible of stitches, the invisible but necessary word. looking for Livingston. That's a quote. Can you talk about how the different valences or colors of silence influence your poetic thinking and practice? So it's really, yeah, you want to say something?
No.
So this quote is interesting because one of the things I say in the preface is that she tries her tongue on looking for Livingston are actually the foundation of Zong. In the one, I was dealing with words at the micro level, and then I suddenly was confronted with silence. And the book, Looking for Livingston, began as the last poem in She Tries, but grew into its own book. So both those obsessions, challenges, concerns led me to Zong. So your question about the
You say always what is going on seems to be about water.
Yeah.
You say in passing, as in your Zong journal. And I guess I'm wondering, what does it mean for water to be going on in a poem, and how you register water's going on in Zong? How does water go on in Zong, or happen in Zong? Or
I don't know why my mind is turning to I mean, I could come at it in different ways, but let me talk about Zong. I think that I am deeply interested in, just as another resource along with the resources that were given, the Greek gods and the stories and the myths and then the English history and so on. But in my adult life, I've become deeply interested in African myths and stories and beliefs and spiritualities. And I don't know why, when you ask that question, what I think about is the deity Olokun, who is the deity of deep water in the Ifa pantheon. And Olokun represents, some of you may have heard of Yemaya. Yemaya is better known in the Western world, and there are wonderful festivals in Brazil. She's the surface water, and Olokun can be male or female or androgynous. But Olokun is the deep, 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 way down where the bottom of the ocean, and is associated with riches and success in life and so on. And, I'm thinking about the role of water in our lives. I mean, I'm moving a little bit away from Zong, but in terms of climate change and so on, and what's happening to the seas and so on, that when those warm, what happens to the living creatures in those environments, and thinking about how central water is to us. I don't know what the percentage is, but we're made up of a lot of water.
anyone in the crowd know? 70. Someone knew it precisely.
Yes. Yes. But it's a lot. Yes. And so the ongoingness of water, I'm moving it away necessarily from the slave ship. But hear me about this. We're all contaminated. And I write this in Zong. Zong taught me this. Even those of us who may think of ourselves as having been victimized, just by virtue of where we live. We all have our cell phones. As Colton, we know what Colton means in the world today. We know the death and mayhem and so on that it's happening in Congo. So there's a sense in which none of us is innocent. All our hands are bloodied. I think I say this in the introduction. Laming said to be innocent is to be dead, or something like that. Yes? So how do we work with that? Yeah. And water was such an amazing source of wealth for the imperial powers, and still is today. Do you know? Yeah. In terms of the sailing ships and carrying bodies across the water and so on. So, I mean, I think that particular sentence may have dealt with specifically with how water was coming to me as I was actually working with the text. Yeah. But when I push it out to the ongoingness of it, I think it is really, really crucial, because when water goes, we are gone. literally.
I don't think there's a better way to end a subaquatic conversation than when water goes, we are gone. So thank you.
Thank you all very much.